All right, we're back. We're live. What's up, party people? My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I've got a very interesting guest. I've been looking forward to this interview. His name is Han. He's known for a company called Autonomous, which is legal infrastructure for the Web3 world. He is a tradfin guy who turned into an entrepreneur before Web3 and exited, you could say just in time for Bitcoin. He sold his company to Lehman Brothers and essentially then found Bitcoin. And he's been building Freedom Tools since. Help me bring on Han. Han, how you doing today, bud?
Hey, Sunny. Good to see you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. Likewise. I'm happy to have you here. So an exit right before the 2008 crash, and then the white paper that kind of rewired everything. I'm excited to peel back on your story. But before we do,
Yeah.
I guess I know there's a couple of things, but like, what's got you most excited these days? Like what, because I know you're doing some really interesting things, but what's got you most passionate? And let's maybe, share a little bit about that. And then, like I said, we go back into your story.
Most excited right now is probably education. I'm doing something on the charitable side, on a nonprofit side, with an old school that we're building, which is living on this decentralized infrastructure. And that's probably something that's going to keep me busy for, hopefully a number of decades still. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It's kind of a little bit post-venture, but it's a primitive in society, how we educate in the age of AI. And so that's where we're going with the school called DDO, small d for decentralization, EDU, so decentralized education. But what also gets me very excited is space. I think we're all excited about what's happening and how basically SpaceX and the vision is being underwritten now by a lot more people than before. Now that it's public, with the big allocation to retail, I think a lot of people got very excited about that. I'm living here in Miami, so I'm kind of 3 hours drive up north to the Space Coast and the launches and so on. So you feel that here, you really do. It's part of Florida, and it's nice to be kind of feeling that this whole Starship thing is probably going to come over here as well.
Yeah, big fan of all of Elon's work, obviously. So Han, take us back. What were you doing in banking in London, before any of this?
Sure, I mean, it was a pretty traditional career path, right? You're talking here, me post-graduating out of the London School of Economics back in the mid-90s. And so you got recruited into banking and you did your stint. I stayed for 6 years at Goldman Sachs. I like to think it was more like 10, 12 years, how hard we worked. Although I probably work harder now than I ever did at Goldman, but more productively, I like to think. But it was 6 years of a traditional banking career, rotating through the bank, advising very wealthy clients at some point, transactional work, all the asset classes. So look, I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but I think you gotta decide at some point, do I want to be part of a regiment? Because a place like that is very regimental, and you kind of know what you got to do to make it up the ladder, or do I want to break free and author my own life? Which I did around 2001. I resigned. I must be one of the few people who ever resigned from Goldman in those days, at least. Now that's a bit more common. And I started my first venture in the UK, in London, where I was then based. And it had nothing to do with crypto because crypto didn't exist. I did keep an eye on, there were some very early attempts to move cash technologically, but we always had that, double spend issue. And so to fast forward, built two ventures in the UK, sold the last one to Lehman Brothers, Europe, before they collapsed, 6 months before they collapsed. We're talking now September 2008, when Lehman was gone. And then remember how in the first Bitcoin transaction, there was actually a reference made to how the Bank of England was bailing out the banking system, right? And so, Sunny, I just want you to think about the mental shift from having seen a very established, entrenched Remember somebody once, I think it was Matt Tabby, who once wrote the article as Goldman Sachs being the octopus on the face of the globe, sucking it dry for everything. And you did have a little bit that feeling of being in the center of capitalism, but the center of centralized capitalism, right? And then suddenly you get that Bitcoin paper sent to you, and I was kind of high and dry when the world was flat on its back because 2008 was horrific. And I tried to figure out, how does this now work? Everything I've seen was centralized service, sysadmin, big money pools controlled by, and then suddenly this white paper is telling me that we will be able to send money without any sysadmin, without any centralized clearing system. And so my curiosity was really more from a technology point of view, from the blockchain layer point of view. With hindsight, I should have obviously invested a lot more in Bitcoin than I did, but I guess we have no regrets. It was really the technology that fascinated me. And then for the years after that exit and the early Bitcoin days, I didn't do much. I must admit, I moved to Asia, based myself out of Singapore, and tried a number of things, invested a little bit left and right. I had a wonderful time, actually. There wasn't that much happening in the world either. And then gradually I got into sort of the very, very early Ethereum community. I spent some time in the Bay Area. I got to know Vitalik very early on. I remember one of the very first meetings on Ethereum was probably back in 2012, may have been just 13, when Vitalik was speaking in some hacker dojo in the San Francisco area. There was literally 12 people there and 2 dogs. And all of the 12, except myself, were hardcore developers, and they were throwing tomatoes at Vitalik. They didn't believe this would ever work. A blockchain that goes beyond just moving a token, but makes the actual token programmable and smart contracts, and the whole vision of Ethereum that Vitalik was already then evangelizing about. Nobody bought it. Nobody bought it. But I was like, okay, I think I understand a little bit Bitcoin. And now this fellow here is telling us that we're going to be able to do more than just create dumb tokens and move value. We're going to actually be able to make that programmable money. And that's how I got very involved with the early days of Ethereum. There was another foundation set up. Not a lot of people know that in Singapore, for the Ethereum Foundation, for the Asian activities. Lots of stuff happened out of Singapore in those days. We're talking now more like 2013, 14, mainnet launch. And I'd like to say the rest is history. What I took away from that is that in the early days, anybody who was experimenting with this technology was really totally oblivious as to how should they sell them set up, how should they set themselves up, what legal structure should they adopt. And that's how it grew into eventually autonomous, where I felt like, my strength is probably never going to be on the hardcore development protocol side. You got to know yourself, right? And so I thought, why don't I help these early teams, Ethereum Foundation included, MakerDAO, Status, the very early plays on Ethereum, just helping, volunteering to help out with how could you set yourself up. And that eventually became one of my main businesses, which is autonomous. We've been helping thousands of Web3 projects setting up their legal stack, so to say, defining it, setting it up for every use case. Okay, and that company is now leading it so live with a very good team, majorly based in Canada, some people in San Francisco, we have some people in the UK, I myself here in Miami. Okay, and that allowed me to do a number of other things as well.
Fascinating. Hey, I was going to ask you a question. So what did working inside the traditional, finance world teach you that most crypto people often miss?
Probably two things. One is that words do count. So in TradFin, right, you are on the phone with a guy or a gal who will probably be educated pretty much at your level. And that may be a bad thing, by the way, but it is a bit sort of, a filter. and you're on the phone and you say, okay, 500 million of this bond done, or you draft an email to a client and you just know that people will rely on it. Whilst what I have seen in crypto is an incredibly cavalier attitude towards people's word. A lot of drama in crypto came from people just not being serious about what they promised, what they put in writing, what they represent. Okay, if only we would have had a little bit more of that sort of sanity check or safety check on what we represent and so on, I think a lot of the drama could have been avoided, for one. Okay, the other thing that maybe not so much from traditional banking, Sunny, but from venture before Web3 generally, is what we've never been able to crack in crypto, and still not, is this idea that stick around for a number of years and then there is a reward at the end of the at the end of the rainbow. So what we've done wrong in crypto, in my mind, is that we created too many projects where there's a very significant payday for the lead team very early on. And then human temptation is just to move on to the next thing that fancies your interest, because you already had your payday. Whilst in Web 2, you have employee share option schemes, you have incentives to hang around, to not move to another project, because if this one makes it, it's going to be a life-changing amount of money for you because you've sweated it for 5 years. And so I really think that a lot of projects have failed purely because of the lack of persistence of the lead team. And you see it time and again. They get the token, and everybody's been guilty. The VCs have been guilty as well. They attach their name to a project, the token has a run up, the lockups expire, if there have been any lockups. And then suddenly, as a lead, you find yourself sitting on millions of tokens that you can immediately sell, or you can sell quite quickly. And then what do? You had your payday. You're not going to stick around. And so if I now invest, I think my only criterion now is pretty much the persistence of the team. Are they just going to sit it through, thick and thin, the eating the glass, as Elon Musk calls it, right? And that we still haven't been able to quite replicate in crypto. And I think that is where we need to learn some lessons from, maybe less CryptoFin, but Web2.
Yeah, the one guy who hasn't sold out yet is Satoshi. So what did you see in the Bitcoin white paper that immediately clicked for you?
Yeah, it was this whole solution to the double spend, right? If I create money digitally, what prevents me from duplicating, triplicating, quadruplicating that? And so Bitcoin seemed to have found a solution to that. The other thing was the simplicity, in a way. There's a couple of key documents in human history, and I really think the Bitcoin paper is one of them. For some people, the Bible will probably be part of that as well, of that series of books and manuscripts that we deem sort of foundational. But the economy of words with which this is explained is pure genius, right? The way this whole new world is unlocked with just very carefully chosen phrases, it's pretty actually bone chilling to read that time and again, how it unlocked a whole new economy, right? I think we should put it up there on our studio or wherever we work from, our office, together with maybe the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the pursuit of life, liberty, etc., happiness. It's one of those foundational documents, without any doubt in my mind, whoever authored that. Okay, and that still resonates, I think, to a lot of people.
Why did legal infrastructure become your wedge into Web3?
Because it was largely absent. It was something that people thought initially they could just DAO and just do stuff and push code without any sort of the limit liability protections that we all look to wrap ourselves in as entrepreneurs. And that's again something where I feel Web3 has sometimes been too careless in just tossing away the whole of history. Remember that Suddenly, legal liability, right, or limited liability, is not an invention of the state. It's actually a beautiful bottom-up process where centuries back, entrepreneurs were saying, hang on, if we start investing in ships and vessels that go out to the Spice Islands, and everything along the way that can happen will cause us to lose our money, why don't we set ourselves up as some joint stock corporation? This goes back to, like, early 17th century Holland. And that joint stock company became, you put in 10,000, I put in 10,000, somebody else puts in 20,000. If the ship is lost, you will only ever lose 10,000. Nobody's going to come and knock on your door as a bailiff and say, the ship was, $1 million worth, suddenly you owe me $1 million. No, you have limited liability. That's been an organic demand from the market, from doers, from investors. A lot of people in crypto think that's some statist intervention kind of thing. It's not. And so limited liability is probably the first line of defense as an entrepreneur, but crypto couldn't care less about it. Look at what happened with DDAO. You remember that, right? In the early Ethereum days, there was no legal infrastructure around DDAO, nothing whatsoever. If at the time people would have known who was behind the DAO, later it came out through the Laura Shin book, I think it would have been a whole different story for that person. I don't need to name names, but it was a little bit catch me if you can mentality. And now that crypto is maturing, that is just no longer tenable.
I remember like it was yesterday. So how well, what do you mean by, and I think I shared this with you on our previous call, but yeah, I because I'm just by happenstance I was so into Bitcoin, and I live in Toronto, and so I used to go to all the meetups, and
Yeah.
And so Ethereum was born essentially right here, and so I got to see the birth of that, and and quite frankly, I definitely didn't think it would ever progress this far. Like, I was very, very skeptical. I mean, it just seemed like a Herculean effort to try and do something of that magnitude. Yet, props. I mean, here we are many years later, and still is number 2 to Bitcoin. Incredible. So I guess let's switch gears a little bit. What do you mean by freedom tools?
Okay, so if we try to kind of like bucket what you can build there as an entrepreneur, and if you are ideologically concerned about freedom, which I am, I think which a lot of people in Web3 are, then I think you kind of default to certain ventures that will help people author their own life. That's kind of, for me, a theme. Let people author their own life. Now you can say, well, why doesn't centralized infrastructure let me do that? Well, not quite, right? Look at everything we contributed at the time to Facebook. Look at everything. It's kind of their property, and you are giving them revenue and making some people incredibly rich. There's definitely an ideological factor of building in a freedom tool space where, for instance, company formation, in a way, it may sound like a relatively unsexy corner of the business world. It is, but it also allows you to arbitrage jurisdictions around the world. You're sitting in Toronto, but you can set up a company in Singapore. You can set up your holding somewhere else. And so it's kind of a vestige of freedom that has historically grown, where we can effectively set up companies all around the world and arbitrage the best regimes, and where we feel most comfortable basing our business in. And the tax that comes with that, at least from a corporate tax point of view. So you could call that a freedom arbitrage. Okay. Autoco, for instance, which is a sister company of Autonomous, I put the Telegram handle here as well, is letting people spin up an entity in 6 seconds with their wallet connected. So you just connect your wallet, and you have an LLC that lets a lot of people who otherwise have real difficulty setting up a company in their home countries spin up an entity, start entrepreneuring. If they need a bank account, they can add a bank account. They have a wallet that's attached to their company. It's no longer their personal wallet. And guess where we get most of our users from? South America. I don't know how familiar you are with South America, Sunny. I am more familiar family-wise, and I guess being here in Miami as well. The difficulty of incorporating your little company in Brazil, even Argentina, countries like Mexico, Colombia, Chile, it is an absolute nightmare with notaries who gate the process, paid up capital. Who has $20,000 laying about if you just come out of university to start your venture? That's what you're going to put in a company in many places to get started with a company, even in Europe. And so make it easy for people to start entrepreneuring. For me, that's a freedom tool. Okay. And so there's a
So,
couple of other things that I do that are really in that category. I like to think in that category. Now, the world is becoming ever darker in that respect. Privacy is not something that is on the mind of a lot of people. They say they care, but what do they actually do? And now with AI, it is a total nightmare from a privacy point of view. We're basically giving away our lives to, machines that grok it all. And so at some point, we're going to have to find a counterbalance. I hope that Web3, decentralization, freedom tools can provide a bit of that counterbalance.
so just to go back to the earlier point around, I keep thinking like the real test for freedom is whether they lower the cost of trust, not just the cost of setup, right? So I'd be curious how you think about trust, reputation, and enforcement in a more open system.
Sure. Let's start with enforcement. It's actually something that I found really intriguing when I first heard about smart contracts, right? And this has perhaps become a bit of a cliche, so forgive me, but with Google, remember the slogan at the time, I'm not sure if they still use that, was, don't do evil. That was like what Google said, right? And I see you laugh because a lot of people laugh. They go like, "What do you mean? Google is evil?" But the slogan was, "Don't do evil." With smart contracts, it's effectively can't do evil because the code prevents you from doing evil. Okay, and so let me explain that a little bit. For instance, let's say that you and I set up a company, right? We're buddies. We've been knowing each other for a while. We trust each other on a human level. We set up a company. It grows nicely. And then suddenly, without me knowing, you transfer your shares to somebody else. You never told me that you wanted some liquidity and you bring in another shareholder. Okay. In the legacy world, there will be probably some sort of shareholder agreement that prevents you from doing that, but you did it anyhow. So I need to take you to court. And you say, Sonny, you should have asked me before you transfer those shares to, whomever. I don't want him as a shareholder in our company. I want you to be the shareholder. And if you do want to sell your shares to me first before you sell it to a third party. Legal pros, big documents, and enforcement in court. Now, contrast this with smart contracts. If the shares in our company would have been tokenized, and not just a dumb token, but actually programmed, that you could not ever transfer your shares to a third-party wallet without me co-signing on that. So pure enforcement through a smart contract, then evil would not have happened. Enforcement would never have been in court. It would have been enforcement through the code. And I find that a really understudied area of blockchains generally, how much you could actually program to just make evil impossible rather than just declaring, oh, don't do evil. Okay. I hope that starts answering some of your question. There's a lot more to it, but trust is effectively pushed to the decentralized coding level as much as you can. And that I think is very appealing, you know.
Right. Okay, but it doesn't obviously do away with evil, right? Because obviously you can still do rug pulls and all the other things that
Oh yeah,
the horrible things that have happened, right?
there's probably always going to be evil at the human level. I think it's just
Mm.
a percentage of humanity that probably has a bent to be more evil. Or look, it's not black and white, it's gray. There's all sort of motives. There's going to be pressures, money pressures. But that's of a different category. That is an intent to be fraudulent. What smart contracts do is they squash your intent to be fraudulent, because you can't be fraudulent. You could not transfer your shares to somebody without my consent, and that's enforced through the code. Even if you wanted to, be really be malicious and say, out of pure spite, this hand guy, I hate him, I don't want to be in a venture anymore with him, I'm going to transfer my shares out and never see him again, you could do it, because the smart contract is not going to allow you to do it.
Got it. So just to maybe switch gears a little bit again. So, schools, AI in the future, I'm really interested in double clicking on that topic, hon. So how does the decentralized school actually work day to day?
Okay, so it's still to be launched September, and there's kind of two components to the decentralization. There's a more technical component, there's a more ideological component. Let's start with the ideological one. The school we're setting up with Didu is entirely decentralized in who can teach and who can learn. So anybody can essentially stage a course on the Didu platform, which, by the way, is not owned by me. It's a non-profit. It's in a decentralized organization, a DUNA out of Wyoming. So there's no like owner. It's kind of owned by everybody, this school. Okay. But the key proposition is that my thesis is that there's a lot of people out there, Sunny, who actually would want to teach, but never got a chance to teach. They're not part of academia, but they build incredible knowledge within their silo, within their passion, within their venture, whatever it may be. And they never got a chance to teach because the educational establishment is kind of pushing them out. They're not licensed, they're not part of academia. And so what are we doing here? We're effectively not tapping into our full collective brain as humanity. We're just tapping into maybe 2-3% of our collective brain by having an educational establishment that limits teaching to accredited teachers, lifelong tenure, the whole thing with academia. So our thesis is, no, open this up. If Sunny wants to teach at the Didu school, the only thing he has to do is he can propose a course. He needs to find the students who will back him, because you will put a course fee. You probably won't do it for free. You could do it for free, but you need to fill your classroom with paying students who say, I want to hear the Sunny guy teach about what would it be, Sunny? You tell me what it would be. Would it be how to do an effective podcast, how to grow your podcast channel, how to do beekeeping? I don't know, what is your passion, but you may want to transfer your knowledge about it. And so I look your profile and I see this guy. I really want to hear him in a almost physical setting, and we are going physical with the school. It's not just going to be online, but it's going to be live, where your 20-30 students in the classroom will have a course taught by you about your topic. Okay, so we're actually going back to in-person teaching in the age of AI. And why is that? Because we use AI for the school for you to structure your course, to break it down in modules, but intelligence, real understanding cannot be prompted. I don't think that real understanding can be prompted. Real understanding comes from me interrogating you, sparring with you intellectually. Sorry, why do you mean? Why do you say that? Basically, what you're doing on the podcast, you're teasing it out of people, you're questioning them. And as a result, one would hope that your listeners gain a real understanding about the topic. And that comes from that live interaction. So everybody can teach. Everybody can be a student, fully open, no admissions, etc. You choose your curiosity, you follow your curiosity, you let it compound. And there is an earning model, which is Web3. You've been a teacher, you've been a learner, you have contributed to the school. There will be a token economy where basically we want to reward you for growing the ecosystem. And we want to put the school itself on for everything, payments and so on blockchains, and also wrap some privacy around it. The privacy is important here. That touches back on those freedom tools. Let's say you're a young chap in China and you're being fed all this sort of propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party. And you have the curiosity, just the curiosity, to hear an alternative story about what's really going on in China. All the things that you don't get to know as a Chinese resident in mainland China, and not even in Hong Kong anymore. Okay. And I can pick another country, by the way. What about I can actually anonymously, totally securely attend a course online, but nobody can trace back that I was the one who attended your course? That gives me an alternative version of something that I've always been fed. And that it is impossible for the authorities to show up at my door at midnight and lift me from my bed because I have been attending a course that is really subversive. So it touches on free speech. It touches on the actual contents, because if you now look, you get me on my soapbox here, right, Sunny? But you asked the question. But if you now look at education in the United States, for instance, there is definitely a bon ton still, as they would say in French, the things that you can teach about, and it's kind of the generally accepted right way of teaching about history, gender, colonialism, da 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 da. But there is an alternative version. And so, if we really are committed to the quest for truth, then you got to give a chance for that alternative version. You got to give a chance to everybody to teach about anything they want to teach about, to transfer knowledge about anything they want to transfer knowledge about.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you next, but I think you kind of answered this already, which is like, what types of teachers and students do you want to attract first? Is it freedom lovers, or you don't care?
We don't control it, and we don't want to control it. It has to
Mm.
be total permissionless learning. Now, I know what you're going to ask next. You're going to go like, what if somebody wanted to teach about what a great man Hitler was, right? Or deny that Pol Pot ever killed millions of people under his regime? That gets tricky. And that's, I think, where, and we're still figuring this out, and there's various models, but I think that's where the community comes in. That's why we probably need that token more than any monetary rewards from you being in the ecosystem, and hopefully that token starting to have its own life on the price side, but more as a governance instrument, where I say, look, Sunny is proposing a course here about, how Pol Pot was the most enlightened leader and never ever killed. That's all just a fable. Okay. Well, that may be tricky for a lot of people. And so maybe we should just kick that in back to a community vote. Maybe we should have a sub DAO that can first see what courses are being proposed. Within the sub DAO, there may not be unanimity on everything. There may be real controversy, and it may be that the sub DAO on Snapshot says, look, for Sunny's course, we had very strong disagreements, and 7 out of the 12 members of the sub DAO, who could be elected, by the way, it doesn't have to be permanent, say that that course should not be taught at Dido. What is the community now thinking about that? Are we following the vote from the sub DAO and enforcing that, or are we overriding that? Most likely what will happen is that the community will follow the vote at the sub DAO level. So the short of it, Sunny, is that there's going to have to be some corrective mechanism in a totally permissionless school. Otherwise, you're going to have some real wackos teaching about real wacko stuff. And you can say, well, lets that happen. I like Musk's approach with X, but even there's boundaries, right? Even on X, there's boundaries. Even though it's much more free speech than it was before, there are boundaries. And we got to get those boundaries in place for Dido as well.
Got it. Why do you think that understanding can't be prompted?
Let's not forget that despite us being wowed now by Anthropic and Fable and so on, it is still an inference tool. It's still drawing from a lot of stuff that is surrounding it, that it links with, to come up with what is then effectively the English language as an answer to everything. It kind of draws from adjacent data, and it has ever more adjacent data. It has massive amounts of adjacent data, but it's still in a way, like what Ian LeCun is saying about that, it's still in a way an extrapolation tool, which is probably also why it hallucinates occasionally. It's getting better, but my contention is that it in the schooling system, to bring it back to Dido, everything that is being taught, or most of what's being taught right now in the current education system, can be prompted. Why would I need to memorize the distance between planet Earth and the moon? Students, they will just prompt for it. Oh, it's X amount of thousands of kilometers. However, if you prompt, why is the moon held exactly in the place where it is held, and gravity and the understanding of the interplay of these gravities and the gravity of the earth and etc. And so the actual genuine understanding, I don't think that can be prompted, and I don't think that will ever be promptable. Even if to a high level we will think that we get an understanding from it, I think it's difficult to imagine that there's ever going to be a spark that sets us off in a whole different direction coming from AI. That is the kind of Einstein spark. I mean, if you read the bio of Einstein, I mean, it's amazing how Einstein's first skill was really imagination. The reason we cannot progress and we are stagnating, if we are stagnating, and some people think we are in a way, like Elon Lecum thinks that actually AI is kind of stagnating, is because we lack the imagination to imagine how a future will look like. One of the few people who can imagine the future is probably Elon Musk, thinking ahead, generations ahead. And so is imagination ever going to be something that we can delegate to AI? I don't think so. It's going to remain our preserve, and that's a good thing. That's why we have the special consciousness that we have. Okay.
Super interesting. So, but I guess on the other side, what does AI now make possible that maybe wasn't practical, I don't know, 3 years ago?
Well, again, to bring it back to the school, what we've seen is a lot of people who are very, very happy to teach, but never got to it because they didn't have the time to structure a course. What we now have on the Didu site is launching version 2 next week, is you can just prompt a title, Sunny, and the AI will structure your whole course. It will even just let you upload like some materials that you refer to that you use for, let's say you wanted to teach about how the pirate republics were actually an experiment in democracy before democracy kind of enlightenment really existed, which I believe is true, by the way. I think it was a lot more egalitarian than the regimes in the 18th century, because the spoils were divided pretty much equally between the crew on a pirate boat, etc. So they were really experimenting with a new governance model. Now, let's say you wanted to teach about that. You read a couple of books about it, you have a PDF, you have a keynote. You will probably not ever have got to a point of formally teaching about that because you never had the time to structure a course. Guess now you go to the Didu site, you have our course studio. You just say, I want to teach about how the pirate republics propose a different governance model and were a lot more egalitarian. The thing is going to think for a little while, and it's going to put a nice title there. It's going to break it down by 5 modules over 5 days, 2 hours each, and it's going to give you your teaching collateral for you to review and approve and start using. Because time and again, I ask people, is there something you want to teach about? Oh yeah, I'd love to teach about. And my whole life, I've been looking at, I'm really passionate about. And I then go, why have you never done it? Oh man, I mean, just getting a course together, I never had the time. And so that's where AI, I think, can be super useful for that sort of like structuring, staging of stuff. Tweets are being staged now with the AI, but I don't think they should be authored by AI, but they're being staged. So that staging work, I think, is where AI is super, super useful. Transactional work.
That makes a lot of sense. And how do you decide which strange ideas are worth building?
I'd like to think that I just feel like you're just gonna do what you feel you gotta do. All right. And if you're in a position where you can do pretty much whatever you feel like doing, it becomes more of an exercise of saying no than an exercise of saying yes. The biggest risk for any entrepreneur, I think, is that they keep pushing on something that is actually not worth pursuing. And that's something that I think tortures all of us, because you could be building at something at 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and then actually figure out that you pushed on a string. And I'm not gonna deny that it's often something that tortures me as well. You keep pushing on something and then you figure out actually it's not worth pushing. you got to be pretty brutal and probably drop those ideas and move on. Luckily, I feel like with the stuff that I at least kind of seeded and where I put a team around it, they at least are super passionate, and that's key. That your team remains very committed and inspired by your vision. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't do something in parallel. I think ever more with AI tools being an extension of us as entrepreneurs, we will be able to do a number of things at the same time simultaneously and see where it leads. Okay. I have a
Yeah.
number of other ideas that I'm pursuing that I can't disclose right now. I don't want to be coy about it, but I shouldn't disclose it because it's in my mind so phenomenal uh, that I wouldn't want to see it copied so soon.
Mm,
And so there's going to be some other stuff coming out of this studio that I think is going to be generally exciting.
super cool. Hey, Han, I gotta say something. This is the most number of live viewers I've ever had. So
Oh, I here.
yeah, I mean, it's not probably that many for a lot of people, but for me, this is a lot. So thank you all for tuning in. Really, really appreciate it. This has been incredible, and it just keeps climbing. Wow, 152 people. I'm so
Wow, that's
yeah.
nice. I'm happy for you, man. That's really
Well,
nice.
I think it's you because I'm doing this 4 times a day. I don't see this many people tuning in. So thank you, Han.
If anybody wants to kind of like get back to me, have a DM. It doesn't have to be business related. It's not my motive to then, oh, is this going to become a client of Autonomous or an investor, but just to riff on some of the themes here, and especially on the school, then I'd be more than happy. My 2 Telegram handles are there, and so people can just reach out if that's okay with you, Sunny. I don't want to
Oh,
poach your audience.
absolutely. Oh
I can
no,
definitely.
absolutely. That's the point of this is to connect people, right? Like-minded individuals, and these are my favorite topics. I've dedicated, almost 13 years to this world. So thank you. I learned a lot, Han. And by the way, you've just won yourself a spot on this show anytime you want to come back. You have some exciting stuff.
Can I just make a final observation now with that we have 150 people
Absolutely,
plus?
please.
My assumption is that most of these people will be younger than me, and I just want to kind of put it out there that not everybody who's in their 50s has to become stuck in a suit and become sort of very conformist. There's a lot of people out there in my generation, and I'm saying that probably to a younger generation, that are probably the most subversive. I'm more subversive than my 2 older children who are in their 20s. Subversive as in to really radically want to change society. And so don't give up hope. It's not all old farts in there. There's a lot of people with very young mindset who are older in age who are part of the Web3 community and are building freedom tools. And that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. It really does.
I don't know how much you're into longevity, but I was listening to Kurzweil tell Tony Robbins this morning that by 2032, which is like not even a blink away, we will essentially achieve this stage where every calendar year that elapses, your biological age will be a little bit more than that, meaning, or less than that rather, meaning we will have reversed aging, which is just like, oh my goodness, what a great time to be alive. That's for sure.
On that, just quickly, that's something that Vitalik at the time said to me back in 2000, and I think it was 16, 17. He said, Han, in 50 years, we will all live 50 more years. And I was then making a calculation. I was 45 then, I think. I was then making a calculation. Okay, if I make it to 95, I'll make it to 145. Isn't that
Yes,
fantastic?
sir.
Because
Yes,
he
sir.
spent a lot of time with me and the whole longevity. He's very much into that. So that would be a fantastic topic to have on the DDU school as well. Longevity. A
Yeah,
lot of
longevity. I love that topic, and I'm here for it. Going to the gym every morning, doing my intermittent fasting now for 6 years, trying to make sure I make it to this. But wow, this is crazy, Han. I feel bad bringing this one to an end, but I want to be respectful of your calendar and your time as well. You were such a great guest, and Han, thank you so much for this time. Yeah. Anything? Where do you share? I guess, are you on LinkedIn, Twitter? I guess you guys are on Twitter for sure. But where do you
Twitter
share
is
your
also
thoughts? Where people can?
autonomous. You can look me up there at Didu School. I don't know if I can actually chat here. Yeah, I think I want to put that there, but bear with us for a little bit longer until we got the second version of the site up. But that's the X for the school. Please follow us there. If you want to do something charitable today, nonprofit, follow the Didu School, and then from there you'll see the other links.
You know what? I think you dropped it in the private chat, and I'm not seeing it come through. So do you want to just tell people the domain real quick?
Yeah. So Didu would just be.
Oh, I see. You did share it here. Look at if you look at the excuse me, the screen.
Yeah.
Do you see? Let's see here. Add banner.
Or the chat. Would that be it?
Show. Is that correct?
No, I would need. Yeah, that's the one.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
People can go learn more about it there.
Grow that a little bit more and see people contribute. That would be fantastic. Okay.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's like almost 170 people listening. So thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, we got a couple more interviews coming later today, but I just have a good day. Han, hang back for 1 minute. I'm just going to bring this one to an end.
Yeah.
Until next time, everyone. Cheers.